Hello and welcome to this webinar, the second in our series on our new book, System1, Unlocking Profitable Growth. I'm Orlando Wood, and joining me today is Tom Ewing.
Hello.
And together we're going to be discussing and chatting through Chapter 2, which is all about innovation. So this is a short webinar today. It's only about 20 minutes long, but we should have about 10 minutes left for questions after our discussion. And so if you've got any questions that come to you as we're talking, please do type them in the box and we will endeavour to answer them at the end. You'll also get a recording of the webinar sent to you tomorrow. And if you'd like to get a copy of the deck that we're walking through today, then do feel free to request it and we'll send that to you too. So this is our book, System1, Unlocking Profitable Growth, and it's written by John Kieran, Tom Ewing, and me, Orlando Wood. And what we're going to be doing over this next few weeks, really, is a series of webinars talking about each of the 5 chapters. The first chapter, Chapter 1, we talked about last week, and it was really describing the features of System1 and explaining why this fast and frugal and dominant way of processing and deciding between options and processing information is so important. And we talked about experience and emotion and pattern recognition as being 3 particularly important features of System1 decision making. And pattern recognition and the ease with which we can process information, new information, is going to be particularly important as we tackle Chapter 2 today, which is all about innovation. Chapter 1, 2, and 3 are now available on the website, and hopefully some of you will have read them. But fear not if you haven't. Hopefully we will be able to explain what's going on in Chapter 2 today. So here we are, Chapter 2, Innovation. And I thought perhaps what better way to start this section on innovation than perhaps for Tom to read us a section on this innovation you see in front of you, the Bialetti Moka Express, which signaled the birth of home coffee. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Orlando. Like most Italians in the early 20th century, Alfonso Bialetti knew that the only way to get a good espresso was to get it from a cafe. Coffee makers were large and cumbersome machines, difficult to operate and far too big for the home. But Bialetti would change that. With his business partner, Luigi Di Ponte, he invented an ingenious method for making cafe-quality coffee in the home for the first time. Now he needed to get people to believe in it. The invention was a stroke of genius. The engineer had observed the way that early 1920s tub washing machines worked, and an idea struck him. By heating water, the washing machine created pressure, pushing the water up and dispersing it over the clothes. Could the same principle of hot water rising under pressure be made to work for coffee? After many prototypes, Di Ponte and Bialetti got their new stovetop coffee maker to work. Water held in the reservoir at the bottom of the device rose up under the pressure created by the heat of a stove through the ground coffee beans held in the central compartment into the upper chamber. Bingo, high quality home coffee. But how did Bialetti go about getting people to accept this novel contraption? He needed to borrow a familiar idea from somewhere else. He found it in a popular coffee service, one middle-class families up and down Italy would have owned or been familiar with. The Art Deco silver coffee service was recognizable by its distinctive octagonal design and black angular handle. So Bialetti adopted these features for his new espresso maker, fashioned from aluminium and Bakelite. His invention came onto the market in 1933 and it was a huge success. It's estimated that 9 out of 10 Italian households have one, and it can be bought to this day all around the world. It brought home espresso to the masses for the first time, and the Bialetti Moka Express, as the coffee maker is called, is deservedly known as a design classic.
Fantastic, Tom. So this device, which is actually a very novel piece of engineering, was made to look familiar and easy for people to understand exactly what it did. It was a device for making and pouring coffee by dressing it up as something that looked very familiar, the coffee service on the left.
And that really is Fluent Innovation in a nutshell. It's about finding something familiar that you can wrap your new idea in order to make it more acceptable. If you don't make it acceptable, if you don't include that element of familiarity and all you have is the novelty, then people's instinctive System 1 concern of the unknown and gut liking for the ordinary and for the familiar will kick in, and you will find acceptance much more difficult. It's very important, basically, as the saying goes, not to frighten the horses.
And frighten the horses. Well, thank you very much, Tom. That cues up nicely this little image. You perhaps wondering what this illustration is in front of you. Well, this is actually an early design for an automobile, Uriah Smith's horsey, horseless automobile, 1899. And it was designed precisely so as not to frighten the horses on the road. Whether it actually came to manufacture is another question. But the idea of putting something that's very familiar on the front of something that's very novel is really at the heart of what Fluent Innovation is about, and how to get your idea accepted. In fact, we talk a bit about car design quite a lot in this chapter, don't we, Tom? There's actually an academic study that was conducted that we reference, which is very interesting because it reveals quite a lot about what it is that people like in new things.
Yes, it reveals really how Fluent Innovation works in the marketplace, and it takes a category with an awful lot of innovation, which is the automotive market. One of the interesting things about the study is there's no way you could have done it even 5 or 10 years ago. It requires high resolution, being able to process very, very high resolution graphics. So what the project did was it looked at new car sales. It was trying to predict new car sales. It took advantage of modern levels of computer processing power, and it was measuring two things. The first was how typical each of these new car designs was. The researchers created an average car shape from all the new models that they looked at, and they measured how close each individual car design came to it. So that was how typical each thing was. And then the second was how complex each car was. That was expressed as the density of visual information on each image. So the more kind of complex features, design features, decorative features and such like a car had, the more novelty it had, the higher the complexity would be. And that was where they needed this image compression software. And the more detailed the image, the more complex the car design. Now, importantly, there was absolutely no way that a human being could have told those differences. They could only be judged by people instinctively at a System 1 level. A human being looking consciously at the cars would have found themselves baffled because the kind of level of detail was too high. And the research team hypothesized that the best-selling cars would either be typical and simple, functional cars for the mass market, or not typical and complex, cars with unusual shapes and elaborate designs to attract the premium buyers. But instead they found a surprising result. The most popular cars actually scored well on both factors. They were both highly typical and highly complex. They were quick for System 1 to process, but they had enough interesting detail to attract attention. And the authors of the study actually refer to this as surprising fluency. So it's Fluent Innovation in action again. When they incorporated this into their predictive algorithm, they were able to improve the accuracy of their car sales predictions by 19%. So Fluent Innovation, this kind of combination of surprise and also of kind of familiarity, is vitally important in the real market.
You see it as well in there was another study that we allude to in the book as well, wasn't there, Tom, about academic papers, so scientific academic papers, and this sophisticated analysis of I think it was about 17 million papers, and they looked at what were the features of papers that were most widely cited and shared, and they were ones that had a mass of familiar work, and then an injection of novelty, so repeating something that's very familiar before I suppose sharing the new thing. And this couching things in the familiar is what gets new ideas accepted. So we have I suppose a shorthand formula for what Fluent Innovation is, and it's presenting your idea, your new idea, in such a way that it feels to people 80% familiar and 20% new. those people who work in R&D functions, and I am one of those, we have a passion for the new, and we like talking about the new thing. But this is a word of caution, I suppose, that you need to dress the new up in something that feels familiar in order for people to accept it, because we have, as Tom says, a gut liking for the familiar. So, how do you go about testing for new ideas, new innovation? Well, to do that, what you need to do is, first of all, get people in the right frame of mind to assess your innovation. Why am I showing you a pointilliste painting by Georges Seurat? Well, because this painting has been used by psychologists to get people into two different modes of thought and assessment. What psychologists have done is that they have asked people to focus on the technique of the painting. So here you can see a close-up of the girl's head in the picture on the right. And of course, the way that this painting is constructed is with lots of little dabs of paint, different colors of paint. And by getting people to focus on the technique of the painting, this encourages what's known as analytical processing. This is closely aligned with System 2 thinking. However, if you get people to look at the whole painting, as you see on the right, and you ask people to focus on the background so that they're looking at the greater picture, if you like, this encourages what's known as holistic processing. And this holistic processing is more closely aligned with System 1 modes of thinking. So trying to appreciate the whole, the gestalt, if you like, rather than specific elements or small parts of the painting. And this is just one way in which you can get people to think more holistically before going on to do another exercise. Another psychological experiment has shown that if you show people a short story, say a trip into town, and you ask people to circle all the I and me words throughout the story, this encourages analytical processing. And if you get people to circle all the we and us words in the short story, then this encourages a sense of distance and holistic processing, a sort of broader, wider, slightly more distant appraisal of anything that you then show them afterwards. And that's what we do in our predictive markets approach. We don't ask people, as is typically the case for new product screening, we don't ask people how likely you yourself would be to buy this new idea, often judged on a buy scale from I would definitely buy through to I would definitely not buy, because that creates analytical processing, an analytical appraisal of what you're showing them. What we do instead is we ask people, through a social distancing effect, we ask people to tell us how likely the idea would be to succeed in the marketplace by asking them to buy or sell shares in the idea. And this creates this, as I said, this social distancing that enables us to get a kind of System 1 response to how people feel about the new idea. So this has implications not only for, of course, how you test this thinking, but also how you present ideas to people. Tom.
Yes. Here we've got two ideas. They're the same idea for Stella Artois Cidre Raspberry, two research concepts. One of them has been designed for analytical thinking, the one on the left. It's laid out as a very typical research concept. It says, it starts with an insight, as most research concepts do. When having fun and socializing with friends, sometimes I like fruity and refreshing drinks, but it's important that they still feel authentic and sophisticated. Now, Stella Artois launched Cidre Raspberry, and this was tested actually kind of around the time it came on the market, but it was a self-funded test, and it was a great success for them. It was one of their most successful products. So the fact that the analytical concept, the kind of concept that was sort of encouraging you to get into a System 2 mode, only achieved a 3-star, respectable 3-star score but not a particularly strong score, was perhaps a sign that maybe a holistic testing version would work better. So we designed this holistic testing concept. And you can see that what we've done here is we've stripped out the insight. We've tried to show, not tell, and we put in a picture. Picture is, as the saying goes, worth 1,000 words. Or in this case, worth about 25 words, since it's replaced the insight. And it's what we've done is we've tried to kind of convey the essence, the holistic essence of the concept in this picture. So instead of saying, oh, it's very authentic, we've shown the raspberries in this kind of old style fruit barrel. Instead of kind of talking about how great the taste is and how kind of well they go together, we've made them congruent by emphasizing the delicious juicy redness of the apples and the redness of the raspberries. So you can tell that these two things fit well together. And then we've still got the basic description of the product. You can't live on visuals alone. You have to kind of have some kind of prompt. So the new Stella Artois Cidre Raspberry has been carefully crafted according to a unique Belgian recipe, which combines hand-picked apples with crushed raspberries to deliver a refreshing, sophisticated cider bursting with fruit flavor. So it's got the same description, but it's got this design for holistic thinking, very visual concept designed to make it more emotional and much more fluent. And it worked. We got a stronger result in the test, better matching real-world values, the real-world success of Cidre Raspberry. So we got a 4-star success. But also, very, very interestingly, what you see is that it was much quicker for people to assess the concept. In the initial concept, it took them almost 17 seconds to buy shares in the idea, and it was chosen less often. But in that time was cut by almost 5 seconds in the holistic test. They only took 12 seconds to assess and to make their decision. So you're seeing faster, more fluent processing at work.
Fantastic, Tom. So the fluent innovation needs to be presented fluently. This way of testing new ideas and concepts, it has shown to be extremely predictive of real-world success. Here you can see a range of 1 through to 5-star concept ideas and how they perform in the real world. And 5-star ideas, ones that where you get high levels of people buying shares in the idea as in relation to selling shares in the idea, they achieve real market success of 3 or 4 times the magnitude of 1-star ideas, and that's across a number of different markets and in different categories as well. So I suppose the question is 1-star ideas, Tom. Do we have any examples of those? Yes.
I mean, obviously it's good for detecting 1-star ideas as well. And from the same drinks test, we had a look at an idea called bacon vodka. Now, bacon vodka isn't a terribly complicated idea to understand. It is literally bacon flavored vodka. But is it fluent? Well, the answer is no, because bacon generally is a morning food. It's oily. It's kind of, nourishing, thick, fatty, full of flavor. Vodka, on the other hand, it's an kind of evening drink. It's very pure, very distilled. It's all about purity, certainly not about the kind of grease and fat of bacon. But interestingly, one of the things that we talk about in the book, actually, with bacon vodka, is how you might make bacon vodka fluent. So there were 2 ways that we thought that we could make bacon vodka fluent. The first was perhaps we could tie it to an occasion. If you think, for instance, about how Starbucks have introduced their pumpkin spice latte in the US very, very successfully. It's become a kind of iconic seasonal drink for them there. Now, there's naturally no inherent relationship between pumpkins and coffee any more than there is between bacon and vodka. But by tying it to Halloween, by creating this kind of congruence around Halloween, they created this doorway to acceptance of a very unusual product. So is there anything that we could use to kind of tie up bacon vodka, to kind of open that doorway to acceptance? And one of the things that we thought of is maybe we could build a chain of associations between bacon and tomatoes, which go well together, and tomatoes and vodka, which go well together in a Bloody Mary. So rebrand it as a Bloody Mary vodka, a kind of like hangover vodka, a morning shot of vodka. Perhaps quite irresponsible, but you can see the kind of congruence, the fluency building up. And the point of it is not that we think bacon vodka would be an amazing success. It probably wouldn't, no matter what you did with it, but that we think that there is almost no idea that you can't find some kind of more fluent pathway towards acceptance for.
So what does this fluent innovation we've been talking about feel like, Tom?
Well, what you can see here is actually literally how it feels. It's the emotional reading. We also test every concept that we look at for emotion, and we'll talk a lot more about different kinds of emotions in the next webinar on advertising. But what you're seeing here is the happiness, the light green part of the pie chart, and surprise. And you can see how the proportions change as you get more successful, as you rise up the kind of sales ladder from 1 star to 5 stars. The proportions change. Now, if innovation was all about the novelty, the kind of excitement of the new idea, what you'd expect to find is that surprise will become more and more important compared to happiness. But actually, it turns out that happiness is the driver. The higher the star rating, the more kind of market ready the innovation, the happier people feel about it and the less surprised they feel. And at 5 stars there at the top, what you actually get is proportions that are incredibly similar to the 80-20 rule that we outlined earlier. 80% happiness, kind of comforting, feel-good familiarity, 20% exciting, novel surprise.
Familiarity breeds contentment, not contempt, you might say. So it's a great example of how happiness and familiarity go hand in hand. So I suppose the question presents itself, how do you go about finding new ideas? And one example that we talk about in the book is the famous Mclaren Bo1 Buggy, the image of which you can see on the slide in front of you now. This was designed by Owen Finlay Mclaren, who was a Second World War aeroplane designer and engineer, and he worked especially on undercarriages, so the wheels and the way that they folded up into the wings. And so he was an expert on aluminium and the way that aluminium can be made to fold up. And in the 1960s, he was struggling. He saw his daughter struggling with a pram, a huge, cumbersome, old-fashioned pram, and thought, well, there must be a better way to push small children around than one of these old, cumbersome prams. And he designed this this fantastic folding mechanism called the umbrella folding mechanism, which folds in and on top of itself to compress it into a very small space. He also took from, I suppose that the history of this distinctive blue and white striped carrier is actually that he had he could only find one piece of material really that was strong enough, and of course that could fold up as well, to support a child, and it was material from a local butcher shop, which had these distinctive stripes on it, the blue and white stripes, and he used this in his designs. And of course, when anyone sees the blue and white stripes, on some level, whether this was by accident or by design, you can't help but thinking in some way of the deck chair, the very common blue and white stripes of another folding chair, and the stripes help to convey and signal in just a brief second that this is a folding chair. So this example here, where we were looking at an adjacent category, I suppose, I mean, very adjacent, completely distant, if you like, from pushchairs, but also the Bialetti Moka Express, where the original inspiration was a washing machine, an early tub washing machine. That's a great way to find inspiration for your your category, for your new ideas, looking perhaps not directly next door, but a little way away, and that's a great way to get inspiration for new innovation. So that's the content of our webinar discussion today. I hope you get a chance to read Chapter 2 on innovation. We have been releasing the chapters every 2 weeks. We've also released Chapter 3 now. And the idea is that we'll do a webinar 2 or 3 weeks after the release of each of these chapters to give everyone a chance to have a read of it before we do the webinar. So if you go to system1group.com, you'll be able to download chapters 1 to 3, and chapter 4 will be coming out next week on brand building. So next time we'll be talking about Chapter 3, but I just wondered in the meantime, Tom, whether there had been any questions coming through from anyone listening.
We're close to overrunning, but we do have time to answer one question, which is, how about disruptive innovations? We live in a world where most of the most successful innovations take place in the digital space and tend to be highly disruptive and radical. Does Fluent Innovation still apply?
Well, I think it absolutely does. I mean, I think when people talk about disruptive innovation, they're actually talking about innovation that disrupts the competition and disrupts the category, not innovation that disrupts the person who's using it, the end consumer. And we have, in fact, a number of examples in the book where we talk about well, I think if we just talk about them, we talk about Uber, we talk about Facebook, we even talk about Pokemon Go, don't we, Tom, in the book? Yeah. These are innovations that are actually built on very fluent things. I mean, if you take Facebook, for instance, which started in university colleges across North America, particularly the Ivy League, so Harvard and so on. The layout of Facebook, even to this day, your newsfeed looks very much like a Facebook or a yearbook entry from that college. And Uber, Tom, I mean, is also actually quite fluent when you think about it, because it was called a ride-hailing app, wasn't it?
Exactly. The behaviour behind Uber is actually quite odd. You are basically getting into a stranger's car, which is something you've been warned never to do. But they made this behavior very fluent by, first of all, kind of adopting the language of taxi services, but secondly, adopting kind of very familiar visual interfaces, the kind of star ratings and such like you get on eBay and Amazon, and the kind of like moving sort of, constantly updated maps from GPS, and it added up to a very kind of quite sort of, familiar feeling experience from the very first time you use it, a very intuitive, very fluent experience. And that, I think, helped enormously with its adoption.
I think Airbnb, the name Airbnb, is also another example of how you make something feel, familiar through even though that the idea of it might be a bit strange at first. It's a great way of talking about it in familiar terms.
Yeah.
So thank you. Any other questions, Tom, or is that, in fact, we're probably running out of time?
Yeah, we're out of time. If anyone does have any other questions or anything they want to talk to us about Fluent Innovation or innovation in general, or the methods we use to measure it and predict it, please do get in touch and email. And we'd like to say again, thank you for listening. Thank you for attending the webinar, and hope to see you at the next one.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.